Good morning. It certainly is good to see everybody this morning. We are continuing our lessons, Engraving Heavenly Truths. Jeremy, I'm not sure it got clicked back on the thing. One of the two of you can look at it. Engraving Heavenly Truths, the survey of the New Testament. We're on lesson 4. Most of the lessons from Engraving Heavenly Truths have anywhere from 9 to 12 cards. This lesson had 6. We can usually finish the 9 to 12 cards in a couple weeks. 4, 5, 6 one time, 4, 5, 6 the next time. So we can do it in a couple weeks. These 6 cards have taken us 3 weeks now. Because they are such cards as you can remember, parables, which later on get broken down into a whole quarter. Miracles we talked about a couple weeks ago. That'll be a whole quarter when we get there. And one of the topics of today's lesson is the Sermon on the Mount, which not only could be a quarter, could probably be a whole year or more. So, I said all that to say this. The first word there of the title is important. That doesn't mean that we want to rush through things just because we're rushing through, but we are talking about a survey, a general overview of what's going on with the topic, and in this case, survey of the New Testament. So let's go back and review a few of the cards that we've had before. Always want to keep this one in here because it's kind of that foundation. What is a testament? It's a covenant. It's an agreement. This agreement is between man, was given to man by God. What is the purpose of this new agreement, this new covenant? Okay, the purpose is to save men. There may be some ancillary reasons as well, or purposes, but the number one thing is we are given and have been given this new covenant, this new agreement in order to save us. Luke 2:52, and Jesus increased how? Wisdom, stature, favor with God and man. Mentally, physically, socially, spiritually. Who was the forerunner of Jesus? Okay, John the Baptizer. Jesus, why was he baptized? For remission of sins? Didn't have sin. Okay? To fulfill the prophecy, or as it mentioned here, fulfill all righteousness. What was right? What was prophesied? What was the message that John preached? Well, Jesus preached the same message. So like John, Jesus preached what? Repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It was the kingdom there yet? It was at hand. It was close. Kind of a figure of speech. It was close enough that you could reach it. It wasn't there yet, but it was very close. So now that brings us to lesson 4, and we talked about miracles. What's the purpose of miracles? Used to confirm the message or the messenger. They did not have the written word as we do today. People were speaking, people were talking the message, the good news. And in order to know whether it was right or the person was authorized, they would often perform a miracle. And this would confirm the truthfulness of what they were saying. Once we ended up with the completed word, miracles ceased. How many recorded miracles of Jesus do we have? Okay, about 35. We mentioned within that 35, he trying to think of a better word, but I can't think of it. Controlled all phases of human existence, from nature, calmed the seas. Our basic needs, produced food, health, healed the lame, the blind, death. He raised people from the dead. He himself would be resurrected. There's not any feature of human existence that he did not show control over with his miracles. And did none of that as showy. They all had a purpose. It wasn't just for show. We'll leave it at that. Last week we talked about Nicodemus. Nicodemus was a Pharisee. What do you remember about Nicodemus and his approach to coming to Jesus? It was at night, which meant that, or seems to appear, that he didn't want it to be out in the open. He wanted it to be hidden. That he was a Jewish religious leader, more than likely a member of the courts. He came to Jesus by night, called him Master. We know that thou art a prophet of God. What did Jesus tell him? You have to be born again. Nicodemus was a very religious person. He knew about baptism, probably knew about John baptizing lots of people. But when Jesus said, you need to be born again, what was Nicodemus? What did he think? He thought physical. Must I enter again into my mother's womb and be born again? John and Jesus preached remission of sins. Now Jesus is adding to that in some ways, saying that baptism is compared to a birth. Put to death the old, raise the new man. Okay? So he taught Nicodemus to be born again. Then we had talked about the Samaritan woman. Now you see why this 6 cards is taking 3 weeks. Each one of these is a lesson, or multiple lessons. The Samaritan woman at the well was taught, God is a spirit. They that worship Him must do what? Worship Him in spirit and in truth. I think Barry's got a lesson on that tonight, so we'll let him speak mostly about it. But the strange thing was, not only was she a woman, and she was Samaritan, she was a sinner as well, wasn't she? And here Jesus openly associates with her. That would have been very strange in that day. As John said, probably not so much as being the sinner. We run into sinners all the time, don't we? But for a Jewish man to speak to a Samaritan woman, kind of in a private setting, doesn't say that anybody else was necessarily around, close. That was a strange thing. Uh-huh. I think that may be the point that I was trying to make with a sinner. We're all sinners at some point, have been sinners. But anyway, the Samaritans worshiped Mount Gerizim throughout history at different places. Jesus tells them that this physical type of worship that they and the Jews were embroiled in, that was going away. Won't have to worship in Jerusalem. Won't have to worship in Mount Gerizim or wherever. That worship involves spirit, our attitude, what we're feeling, what we put into it, our emotion. If you want to talk about that, I don't think it's limited to that. But then also in truth, exactly what God says. And you have to do both. The Jews were stuck in trying to perform every little task without the emotion, without the mindset that they needed. And so Jesus was changing that. All right, so now we get into the cards for today. That is number 29. Once again, I said cards. You all know what I'm talking about. If you're familiar with this, cards in class, they're flashcards. So card 29 on the front would have Sermon on the Mount. Then on the back of the card it would have the answer that we're going to talk about. Matthew chapters 5 through 7. Sermon on the Mount teaches, that's the front of the card. So what does the Sermon on the Mount teach? Okay, that's where it starts, isn't it? With the Beatitudes. True happiness. Happy is the man that... How do those go? Poor in spirit, they that mourn, those that are meek, hunger and thirst after righteousness, gives all these things. And then it turns it around, and it's almost what we would call an oxymoron, something that's said or stated that if you think about it, makes sense, but you kind of put it together and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Think about, let's just talk about the first one. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You're poor, but you're going to be in possession of a kingdom. That doesn't, if you're a king or you're in possession or royalty, you're not thinking of too much as being poor, are you? So it states one thing and then comes back and states another one that seems to be in conflict, but they make perfect sense when you think about them. But these Beatitudes, that's where it starts. True happiness, how to have a godly life, Jesus' purpose to fulfill the law, Jewish traditions and how the Jews had taken it too far, a step or maybe two steps too far, hypocrisy, security versus anxiety, think no thought for tomorrow, tomorrow will take care of itself. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And other subjects, and we'll go through a few of these as we do that. We talked about the Beatitudes. We're going to talk about salt and light. Ye are the salt of the world. Ye are the light of the world. That's in the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount has been characterized as the constitution of the kingdom. We understand about the Constitution that we have in this country. It's the laws, the rules that we follow, that we go by, that we live as a nation. Now, our physical country and its physical constitution seems to be embroiled and embattled all the time. What Jesus states here, there's no dispute about it, is it? He's the one with authority. He's the one that can make the rules, make the decisions, and so that's what we see here. All right, Matthew 5, 1 through 12 are the Beatitudes. We're very familiar with those. It talks about true happiness. Those that hunger and thirst after righteousness, they're going to be filled. When someone persecutes you, put a smile on your face. That's hard to think about, isn't it? You're going to be persecuted. And what we see as persecution today, people may talk bad about us, or they may not invite us to a get-together or a party or something, and our feelings are really hurt. When you talk about persecution in this day and time, my mind automatically goes to Stephen. My mind goes to Saul, breathing threatenings and murders, going in, dragging them out, hauling them to prison, putting them, consenting to death. That's persecution, isn't it? So when he tells them, blessed are you, or happy, or you're to be happy when someone persecutes you, that has a whole different meaning, doesn't it? when someone's beating you and oppressing you with prison and killing you? That'd be tough to do. So the Beatitudes. All right, verses 13 through 16, salt and light. Talk about this a little bit later. Ye are salt and light. I had it written down here. Leslie, is that a metaphor? Ye are salt and light. Okay. So not only did we talk about later, Jesus uses parables, he uses metaphors too, right? Because this is one. Ye are salt. Were they literally salt? No, but some of the characteristics of salt. Okay. Preservative. Adding flavor. Okay. What about light? Were they literally light? No. But they had some of the characteristics of light. They shone. Okay. That's absolutely right. All right. 17 through 20 talks about Jesus coming to fulfill the law. 21 through 48, attitude and action. And I kind of see this as, this is kind of giving flesh to the bones of worship in spirit and in truth. You can do the right thing, but if you don't have the right attitude about it, it's not doing you any good. Okay? It's null and void, vain worship. Okay? Talks about a lot in those verses. It says in the heart. Then you go to Matthew chapter 6, the model prayer, the dangers of hypocrisy, 1 through 18. I think my favorite. It's hard to pick, you're talking about these are Jesus' words, but this next section, the section 19 through 34, avoiding anxiety. Okay? Avoiding anxiety and what the real security is. Lay up for yourself treasures where? In heaven. Because he'd already said you're relying on all these physical things. They're going to rust. Moths are going to get to them. They're going to decay. They're not going to be here forever. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where the rust isn't going to get them. The moths isn't going to get them. The real treasure, isn't it? I think that might be my favorite group. Matthew chapter 7. I had this next screen. Not covering all these, but Matthew 7:1. Judge not that you be not judged. Does that mean that we can't judge anything? That's not what it means, is it? It means to be careful with the kind of judgment that you're giving. If you're going to be strict and hard and cruel and demanding of everything, then that's the same kind of judgment that you're going to get. But we're supposed to judge. We're supposed to make determinations based on right and wrong, or good or evil, truth, untruth. Okay? Yeah. And that it goes back to that John said about hypocrisy. How do you feel about that? And then later on we see a parable about that where the man asked for forgiveness on a huge debt, and he's granted that, then goes right out and grabs one of his fellows that owes him a comparative amount, little, grabs a hold of him and makes him pay, throws him in prison. That's what we're talking about. Our actions need to reflect that. Our judgment needs to reflect that. Ask, and it shall be given unto you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and the door shall be open. verse 7 of chapter 7. Keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. Verse 13, we know about, we've heard lots of sermons, I'm sure, on the narrow way and the broad and the straight gate and the broad way. Identifying false prophets by their fruit. A false prophet that's preaching something that is not authorized will never produce Christians. It can't. Doesn't have the right seed. How much false doctrine, we'll call it, how much false teaching can there be in order for the seed, the word, to be corrupted? Any? Even a small amount? Not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom, verses 21 through 23. And then I want to finish up with this, talking about the Sermon on the Mount. Boy, that got through that quick, didn't we? The Sermon on the Mount, or the recording of the Sermon on the Mount, what does it end with? We talk about the Lord came out and made a statement immediately, didn't He, with the Beatitudes. Everything else, once again, you understood what I said there at the end of chapter 6 is my favorite part. But think about those first 10 or 12 verses, the Beatitudes. He came out and made a statement, didn't He? All these things that we think are happening in our head, this is the way it is. But when you get persecuted, you're supposed to be happy about it. When you're hungry, this is where you go to get filled. You're going to inherit the earth if you're meek. Okay, all those things. He came out, that was quite, that was the preamble, I guess, of the, is that what? But just as important as how a speech or how a sermon is closed, right? The conclusion. What does he conclude with? Started with the Beatitudes, went through, and then maybe it just kept building and building and building. Now what's he going to end with? The wise man built his house on the rock. What's the point of that? Just kind of, it's not just there, but it almost seems to be just there. He's telling them, right? What does the wise man do? He builds his house on the rock so that his house will stand. The foolish man builds his house on the sand, and his house is going to collapse, and great was the fall thereof. What's the rock? Christ is the rock. But what's the rock in this circumstance? What's the foundation? Everything in the previous chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7. That's the foundation. Build your house on these sayings of Christ. So Christ's sayings are Christ. But think about that. Isn't that what he's wrapping up with? The wise man is going to take these things. He who has ears, let him hear. Wise man's going to build on this foundation, the foundation that he's laid out here in chapters 5, chapter 6, chapter 7. What's the foolish man going to build on? Something else, whatever it is. Wise man builds on the rock. Verses 28 and 29. What was the reaction of the people? I'm sure some believed, some were skeptical, but it says there that the people noticed that he taught as one having what? Having the right to be able to teach this. We could call it authority. He had authority. All right. Let's finish up. That clock just goes faster and faster. If I'm sitting in class at school, Marcia, Leslie, that clock moves slow, doesn't it? Unless you're doing something that the kids are really interested in, you need more time, then it just seems like it goes like it. So that's what's happening today. So what's a parable? What's the old saying that we've learned for years? An earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Something that was common knowledge, something that was well understood, that could be applied to a new teaching. Okay? Can be applied to a new teaching. Stories with familiar events, well-known illustrations, an actual event that could happen or did happen. You all can read that, right? Back in the tray, if you haven't picked one up, is this similar type sheet. This is not the sheet. I had to reformat it to get it up here. But back there are the parables. In fact, I think the sheet says parables in chronological order, maybe. Is that what it says? So pick one of those up. All right, a parable. Let's talk about this. Earthly story with a heavenly meaning. I think that's perfect. It's easy to remember. It's catchy. Helps us understand what's going on. Is a story about subjects that people were familiar with. Fishing. Where did we learn the other day? The parable of the pearl of great price and the treasure. People understood about pearls, didn't they? They knew what treasure was. Showed how valuable. What else? Story about subjects people familiar with. You can go down the list there. They were either actual happenings or were something that could happen. What about the Good Samaritan? You think they were familiar with travelers getting accosted, beat up, near to the point of death by robbers? People would come upon them. Yeah, to Jericho, weren't they? She said they was afraid to travel. Exactly right. Travel in groups, I'm sure. Travel to protect yourself. Okay, we talked about it. I'm not sure it's... When I think of a parable, the one that comes to mind is the parable of the sower. Maybe for you it's a different one. But if I had to say one, that was it. And we're fortunate, we're blessed, because not only do we have the parable, we have the meaning of it, the interpretation, right? You know, sower goes out and sows the seed. We don't have to worry about what the seed is, do we? Later on it tells us the seed's the Word. The birds come. Well, who are the birds? The bird's Satan. The thorns rise up with the seed. They're the cares of the world. The hard ground, that's the hardness of the heart, right? And we know all these things. We're not always that fortunate that we have to have the meaning of it. But we do on that one. But people were familiar with the process of agriculture and sowing seed, were they not? So that's what Jesus did. He took something that was already known and applied biblical, a religious, his teaching to that. Was Jesus the first one to ever use parables? No, parables were used even in the Old Testament. On at least a couple of occasions, we have them recorded. The most well-known, I started to say famous, that's probably not a good way to say it, but the most well-known of those was, does anybody remember? Nathan comes to David and says, a rich man, he stole the sheep, the lone sheep of a poor man, and he's talking about David, right? So it's a message there that had a different meaning. All right. It's not a fable. We understand about fables. I remember there used to be a cartoon. Took Aesop's fables and made them into cartoon form. Aesop had a fable. Fables usually involved talking animals. Is Orwell's Animal Farm, is that kind of a fable too? It's an allegory, I think, as well. We'll talk about that. Shakespeare used metaphors. The whole world's a stage, is a stage. We've talked previously about similes. You're busy as a bee, or something as like to, or blind as a bat. It's a comparison of two things. They appear to be dissimilar, but when you combine them, they make a lot of sense. Jesus said, because he used a simile as well, send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Matthew 10:16. Pharisees were hypocrites. They are like whited sepulchres. On the outside, they look beautiful, but on the inside, they're full of death. That was Matthew 23:27. Talked about metaphors. Ye are the salt of the earth. We've mentioned that one. Fables have animals that talk, trees and plants that talk. An allegory, every detail of an allegory has to mean something. That's not necessarily the case with a parable. Allegory is self-interpreting. Parables often need to be explained. I am the light of the world, Jesus said. I'm going to give you these three things, then we'll be done while the kids are coming in. Why did Jesus use parables? Matthew 13, that's where you want to go. Matthew 13, 7 through about 17. It's to reveal the truth to inquiring or desiring minds. That's one reason. To reveal the truth. It also concealed the truth from those that were not interested. And then number 3, from Psalm 78, verses 2 and 3, it was to fulfill prophecy, because that's what the psalmist said. All right, here's your weekly reading for next week. I'll put lesson 5 out, and you can pick that up on the way out. Appreciate it. Went a little bit long today. We'll let the kids come in. Appreciate your attention, and we'll take a short break and be back for our worship period in about 10 minutes.